Whether you're a new team working together, an existing team looking for a reset, or just unsure about where a project is headed, it's important to get everyone on the same page. In this episode of This Meeting Sucks, we're going to walk you through the first phase in our MeetingMakers Framework, initiating, which includes project kickoffs and team charters. We'll discuss the importance of this stage and take you through our agenda templates for both, which you can access for free on Session Lab using the link in the description. With these meetings, you can lay the groundwork for success, ensuring everyone is on the same page and ready to tackle whatever comes their way. Welcome, Meeting Makers. I'm your host, Lauren Green, meeting coach and facilitation trainer, here to help you unsuck your meetings one episode at a time. I've helped hundreds of professionals and organizations through leading inclusive, engaging, and productive meetings, and now I'm offering this podcast to help you do the same. Think of this podcast as an ongoing workshop, where each time you tune in, you'll get a bite-sized nugget of knowledge you can apply right away. If you lead meetings or might someday, you're in the right place. Let's make your meetings work. Picture this. It's 2021, and after a crazy year of the pandemic, lots of changes and new bosses coming and going, the product division of an air industry corporation needs a serious reboot. We gathered 6 leaders and 2 members of human resources for a 2.5-day retreat, with the goal of helping this team improve how they work together so they could more effectively lead their division through the turmoil and change. We used a team charter process to help build a holistic picture of agreed-upon team practices. Basically, a game plan for meetings, how they're going to deal with conflicts, and meeting rhythms and norms. And you know what? It worked. Meetings got way better, and everyone was more productive and on track with the company's goals. The product division team shared their success with the rest of the company, and their leaders wanted to repeat the experience at the highest level of the company. They recognize that taking the time out to create or reset working and meeting practices can turn things around for the better. Kicking off a new project or team or refreshing an existing one can be a messy process. Maybe you were appointed to run a new initiative or even a new organization. It sounded like a great idea when you raised your hand, but now that you're in charge, you have no idea where to start. Think for a minute about a time when you were starting a new project or a new job. What questions came up for you? How did you feel? When starting something new, most people want the same things: clear guidance and working norms like when and how to meet, where to find standard operating procedures, and who to ask for help. We'll discuss this more in the next episode, but when these things are missing, people often start blaming others for their lack of clarity. What could have been a simple discussion at the start of a project can escalate into a toxic cycle of finger pointing. Sound familiar? If you're in a team like this now, all is not lost. Whether you are new to working together, noticing flaws in your existing team or organization, or just unsure about where a project is headed, it's never a bad time to take a step back and get everyone on the same page. Think of the starting line of a race. You want everyone to be on the same track and headed in the same direction. Otherwise, you'll end up with a chaotic marathon. The first step in our Meeting Makers framework is initiating. Meetings in this phase are super important because they set the stage for an entire project or practice. It's where you hash out who does what, how you communicate, and what to do when things inevitably hit the fan, because let's face it, they always do. By getting everyone on board with practices from the get-go, you ensure smoother sailing for the journey ahead. It's much easier to laugh off problems when you've already agreed on how to tackle them together. While there are many different ways to start anew, we're going to talk about 2 approaches that we use a lot. The first is a project kickoff, where the need for a project or initiative has already been identified, a team has been assembled, and now it's time to bring them together to ensure everyone is on the same page about what they are there to do. The second session is a team charter session, like the one mentioned at the top of the episode, where a new team or working group comes together to define their goals and ways of working, which includes meeting rhythms. A project kickoff done in full can take about a day, and a team charter done in full about 2 days. But if you don't have this kind of time, you can pick and choose what sections are most important or break up the pieces into multiple shorter meetings as needed. So feel free to deviate from our agenda in a way that works best for you and your team. But don't shortchange the conversations. Trying to move too quickly through some of these conversations does more harm than good, as it limits the option for everyone to contribute at their fullest potential. Remember, you don't have to write any of this down because we're giving you agenda templates for every episode in the season for free. If you get really excited, you can purchase our mural, online whiteboard, or printer friendly poster templates, and you can find everything linked in the description. So let's start with the project kickoff. I want to start this by saying that project management is a huge field. Many of you listening may even have what's called your PMP certification. And so, for the purposes of this project kickoff, we're not necessarily aligning exactly to what you may have learned. We're keeping this at a pretty high level, and you can absolutely integrate other best practices from your training. The other thing I want to mention is that we are already assuming that the goals of the project have been identified, but it's possible that in your case that they haven't. If that's the case, stick around because in later episodes, we're going to give you a process for how to collaboratively define the goals for your project. So, just like all of the agendas in our season, we always invite the project manager or the sponsor of the initiative to kick off the meeting. This really should be the time when they provide context and background for the project and really make sure everyone feels welcomed. After that, before you start introductions or lengthy presentations, take a minute to go over the agenda and the meeting agreements. We have some example meeting agreements linked in our Session Lab agenda template, which you can definitely check out, or just think about what your hopes are for the behaviors that you'll see present in the meeting and define them. Other facilitators may want to invite the group to define what meeting agreements they would like in order to feel successful for that meeting. Next, we have introductions. We always recommend doing introductions when a team is new, but if everyone already knows each other, then we would recommend doing a quick check in and have each person share one hope for the meeting or a question they have that they definitely want to make sure is answered. After this, take the time you need to do your presentations. We recommend about 30 minutes or less, and you can use this time to review any known information about the project, which could include the purpose of the project, vision or targets, key deliverables, scope, roadmap or timeline, roles, responsibilities, known risks and constraints, meeting rhythms, resources, and anything else that you know. And if you don't know all those things, we'll have some guidance both in this episode and later episodes that can help fill in those gaps. After your presentation, we recommend giving about 10 or 15 minutes for question and answer. If you end up going over time or running out of time, then just capture any questions. We love using Mentimeter as a way to collect questions and feedback, and you can use that to create an FAQ document and answer them after the meeting if you don't have time to get to everything. The first big activity that we have in our project kickoff is a stakeholder needs activity, and this takes about an hour. The purpose of this activity is to get consensus on who the project is serving and what we hope to do for them. You're going to start this by providing a list or inviting participants to list key stakeholders on a flip chart. And if you want, you can use our template, which is part of our package of materials for this episode, linked in the description. Try to be as specific as possible about who the key stakeholders are. For example, students with disabilities rather than just students, or high-risk youth rather than just citizens. The reason for this is that the more specific you can be about who you're serving, the more personal it is for everybody on the project, and the more concrete you can get about what it is that you're there to do for them. If you have more than 10 stakeholder groups, invite a vote to get to the top 10. Next, have participants identify the key challenges and/or needs of the group next to each stakeholder. Finally, invite participants to identify how this project or whatever it is that they're working on might address or solve this need or challenge. For groups that are bigger than 8, we suggest assigning stakeholder groups to individual breakouts to brainstorm challenges and solutions, And then you can harvest them up to a larger chart either in the front of the room or if you're online into a mural online whiteboard or other shared document. Separate from the 1 hour of working time, you may also need an additional 20 minutes or so for shareouts and reflections, especially if you're working in breakout groups. In our agenda, we then have participants going to lunch for about 45 minutes. And then after lunch, we have an energizer for you. It takes about 15 minutes and it's called Start with the Last Letter. And this energizer, the purpose is to warm up the brain for listening and communication, which are essential skills for project kickoff periods. One person would start by saying what they had for breakfast and then hands it off to the next person. The following person also has to answer the question about what they had for breakfast, but they must start their statement with the last letter of the sentence from the previous person. And you continue this process until everyone in the group has gone. Then you can go to a couple of reflection questions like, what was that like? What did you notice? And my favorite, why do this energizer as part of a project kickoff? And the hope is that participants will talk about how new projects are opportunities for people to learn and improve their communication, and that handoffs between tasks and assignments, or in this case, between people, can often be very challenging. So it's important to listen in order to keep things moving. Moving on, we then go into our second and final large activity for this agenda, which is identifying risks and assumptions. And for this, we've given about 90 minutes to do the whole activity. The purpose of this time is to brainstorm potential risks and assumptions and consider how we might address them as a team. We have a template that's part of our package if you want to grab that. If you're leading the meeting, the first thing you want to do is define what we mean when we say risks and assumptions. Risks are potential events or situations that may adversely affect the project's success. And assumptions are conditions or events that are considered true or certain for planning purposes, but may not be guaranteed. Have you ever made an assumption about how long it's going to take to do something? That's what we're talking about here. The first step is to explore risks. You're going to invite participants to identify potential risks associated with the project or initiative and encourage participants to think broadly and consider all aspects of the project. Then, capture the identified risks on sticky notes or on an online whiteboard, clustering similar risks together and labeling themes. The next step is to explore assumptions. Invite participants to identify assumptions underlying the project's planning and execution. Encourage participants to question underlying beliefs and consider what might not go as expected. For example, we might assume that key stakeholders will provide all the information necessary by the end of Q1 to ensure the project remains on schedule. That might not happen, so it's an assumption. You're going to capture all of these identified assumptions on sticky notes or on a digital whiteboard, clustering similar assumptions together and labeling the themes. Lastly, review the list of identified risks and assumptions. You're going to ask the group to prioritize these based on their potential impact on the project using a dot vote or rank sorting activity. We love using Mentimeter for rank sorting activities, but you can also easily do this on stickies. If you're in person, you can give each person 3 to 5 dots to vote on the areas of potential highest impact. Or if you're online, you can use a voting tool that's present in the application of your choice. Next to the top 3 to 5 risks, you're going to brainstorm mitigation strategies for the highest priority risks. And next to the top 3 to 5 assumptions, discuss with the group ways to validate or challenge those critical assumptions. This is really all about documentation. It's just giving the group a chance to think through what could go wrong and what do we need to think about so that when it happens, it's more likely that they'll be ready with a strategy that they can use. For groups that are larger than 8, we suggest doing this activity in small groups and harvesting the top risks and assumptions during a report out. To save time, ask groups not to repeat any risks and assumptions other groups have already identified. A final dot vote may help surface the top concerns to address as the project kicks off. In our agenda, we've got a 15-minute break here. And then in closing, we suggest doing a gallery walk, as in have the participants walk around all of the posters and anything that they've worked on that day. If you're online, of course, they'll do a virtual gallery walk of any materials they've worked on. And then with a partner or a small group, ask participants to identify 1 to 3 key takeaways that you think are important for the team leaders to consider as the project progresses. And finally, no meeting would be complete without next steps, identifying the what, who, and when. In other words, use a 3 column flip chart and invite participants to clarify what tasks or next steps should be on the list. Then ask them to identify who should be doing each one. You can always assign multiple people to a task. And then, of course, identify when. If there are any non critical next steps, you can always use a parking lot or a backlog to collect those for another time. But if you do have time, it's not a bad idea to go back to that parking lot or backlog and identify who's responsible for bringing that task or idea back up at a more appropriate time. All right, meeting makers, are you still with me? That was one of 2 agendas that we're going to walk you through in this episode. And this is probably one of the longest episodes in this season because the project kickoff, the team charter, if these are done right, the project goes better. And so we spend a lot of time on it and we emphasize it so much because we know that these are the most important periods of time to get it right. After our little break here, we're going to walk you through a team charter session and what we recommend doing for that. Again, you can find our free Session Lab templates linked in the description, along with our mural online whiteboard and printer-friendly poster templates that you can purchase. Hey, meeting makers, did you know that we are on season 4? That means there are 3 other seasons that you may have missed. In season 1, we give you just-in-time meeting skills, a crash course in meeting prep you can listen to in less than 2 hours to help you get ready to lead your next meeting. In season 2, Meet Smarter, Not Longer, we break down day-to-day meetings like weekly tag-ups, one-on-ones, and ad hoc meetings to help improve your and your team's productivity starting as soon as you finish the episode. And in season 3, a participant's guide to unsucking your meetings, we give you strategies for improving meetings, even when you're not the one leading them. Don't have time to listen to a full season? Our season playbooks are available for purchase at makemeetings.work/store. Our playbooks contain all the guidance and resources from the season in one convenient PDF. While you're there, check out our This Meeting Sucks tote bags, notebooks, mugs, and more available at makemeetings.work/merch. Your purchase helps us produce future seasons, plus there's never been an easier way to let your boss know that they need to listen to the podcast too. And we're back. Before we dive into what a team charter is and how we walk through our agenda, I want to first distinguish between a team charter and a project charter, or sometimes called an advisory board charter, initiative charter. There are some similarities. Both a team charter and a project charter are going to go over goals, roles and responsibilities, and activities, but a project charter is probably more formal and it's going to have a really clear purpose, goal statement, team structure, time commitment, governance, schedule, and those kinds of things. And a project charter may be a temporary document and just for the purposes of advising on a specific need or task. Usually the leader or a small planning group can come up with a draft charter that can be reviewed during the first meeting for feedback. But a team charter could be a little bit different. This is something where a team is really coming together to decide how are we going to work together. Some organizations and teams call this our ways of working, and you can use whichever one of those terms you like better. I'm going to skip over some of the preliminary things that we already covered when we talked about project kickoff. Just know that we recommend that the project or team leader starts off and then go through your agenda and agreements and then do your introductions or your check-in. Once you get through those things, we recommend anchoring what you're about to talk about with a common model. The 2 that we like to use are Patrick Lencioni's 5 Behaviors of a Team and the Tuckman model. You can find a version of these models online and just display them on a poster or a slide. Just be sure that they're properly labeled with where they originated from. With Patrick Lencioni's 5 Behaviors of a Team, sometimes called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it starts at the bottom of the pyramid. And on the bottom of the pyramid is trust, which is the foundation of a healthy team. Once teams have established trust, it enables constructive conflict, which is the next part higher up on the pyramid. When teams can weather conflict constructively, then they can better commit to the project or effort. And commitment is the next part on the pyramid. With a fully committed team, members are motivated and can hold each other accountable for their tasks. So, accountability is the next part. And then ultimately, this enables the team to achieve high results, and results are at the top. So, a lot of times, what I like to say with this is we tend to want to start at the top with what results are we going to achieve. But what the 5 behaviors model is telling us is that we have to establish trust first before we can create space for all the things that need to be there in order for results to happen. So we have to ask ourselves, what helps a team build trust? And you can actually invite this as a prompt to the group and invite a few people to comment. As needed, you may want to add things like, we need to have some informal time together. It's important to have a shared challenge. It's important to be open and vulnerable with each other as appropriate in the workplace. And also, building a team charter together is a way of building trust. Next, I usually pull up the Tuckman model, which you may have heard before: form, storm, norm, perform, adjourn. And what I like to do is note that whenever teams have new members joining or others leaving, you have to reform the team. And that's an essential part of a team being able to fully adopt new members and have them feel like they're part of the team and they know what the team is about. I also like to note that building a team charter together can help a team form so that when the storming happens, it's weathered with more care and resilience. Then lastly, I also note that adjourning is often missed in the model, but it is an integral part of the process because that's where lessons learned are captured and accomplishments are celebrated. So then I like to open up a brief conversation asking the question, has anyone ever been on a high-performing team? If you get anybody raising their hand, ask them if they could share a little bit about what made that team so successful. And if no one chimes in, you can invite people to share what a high-performing team might look like and be specific about the behaviors of that high-performing team. This is really going to segue you into reviewing the elements of a charter, because some of what they talk about when they talk about high-performing teams are going to be things that you're going to build into the charter. Like, we have shared goals, we had shared values, we had norms around how we handled conflict, we communicated well, we had clear roles and responsibility, we had really good meetings, and we shared information really seamlessly. And even we had really clear team management practices, and we had a clear decision-making model. So what you're going to do is you're going to review elements of the team charter. And those are the things that I just went through: goals, values, conflict communication norms, roles and responsibilities, meeting and information sharing, team management preferences, and decision-making norms. And if you would like to use our team charter template, you can get that in our package linked in the description. I also like to note when I'm reviewing the elements of a team charter that teams can choose to focus on a few of these things. You don't have to do all of them. So you could just pick, say, roles and responsibilities and conflict norms. That's fine. This is a lot to get through, and you may not have 2 days to do an entire team charter. So maybe just pick a few things, and you can always come back and do other things over time. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to go through the whole kit and caboodle so that if you want to spend the time doing it, you have everything that you need. The first thing we're going to start on is clarifying team and project goals. And the purpose of this section, which we estimate takes about 30 minutes, is to ensure that all team members clearly understand the goals of the project and/or team. We're assuming that team and project goals already exist in some kind of clear format and simply need to be communicated for understanding. The instructions for this is to first provide a little bit of background, review any known challenges or trends related to the team purpose, and then using the team charter as a reference, review the team's purpose and how it addresses known challenges and trends. If you haven't done so already up to this point, you're going to want to write the team's purpose on the team charter itself. Then you can move on to outcomes, so reviewing what success looks like as a team and making this as tangible as possible. As needed, include other project specifics such as key deliverables, scope, roadmap, timeline with milestones, roles and responsibilities, risks, constraints, And all the good things that we talked about so far in this episode that you might also cover in a project kickoff, you could also re-mention them here as you think is necessary for that team. And then it's simply a matter of inviting clarifying questions and feedback around the team's purpose. But if you don't have a purpose statement, then we're going to give you an activity on how to better define that with the team, and that'll come later in this season. Here's a tip. If there's a lot of feedback, you can always have team members work in small groups to capture their feedback, positive and constructive, and share it back in the big group. Be sure to capture all of the thoughts and let participants know when and how you will review and incorporate that feedback. In our agenda, we have a 15-minute break, and then we have an energizer called 5 Favorite Movies, which we learned from our friend and colleague Dean Myers from Viz World. And the purpose of 5 Favorite Movies is to explore shared values through the entertainment that we seek. And it takes about 30 minutes to do, so be sure you give it enough time. You invite participants to write down their top 5 favorite movies on a sticky note or a digital sticky note. But you have to make sure that they capture each movie on a separate note. Then you're going to invite participants to place their stickies under the category in which it best fits. You're going to need to make sure that you have a flip chart or a digital whiteboard with categories of movies that they can group their stickies underneath. So things like sci-fi and fantasy, musical, drama, action, horror, comedy, romance, animation, documentary, foreign or indie film, and you always need an other category. So then once the stickies are grouped, then you can have a really interesting reflection conversation about values. So I usually start by saying, what do you notice? And then have a little discussion. You could ask which categories are most populated or least populated. You could ask if there are any similarities in the titles or the categories that we choose. You could ask, are there any common plot lines or time frames when these movies occurred? And then you want to move it into a deeper conversation and ask, what can you observe about us as a team based on this exercise? So, for example, if you've got a lot of movies and comedy, someone might say that we are a group that seeks comedic relief because maybe we've got a lot of stress and we need that comic relief from time to time to relieve that stress. If you have a lot of sticky notes under animation, that could be an indicator that a lot of people in the group are in touch with their inner child or perhaps have children themselves or children in their lives. So these are things that you can start to create some shared experiences based on the movies that people chose. And then lastly, and most importantly, is to ask what values seem to be present. Maybe we value humor, or we value doing the right thing, or we value adventure, or we value overcoming a challenge. These are things that tend to show up in the types of entertainment that they choose, but also can say a lot about how a team works together. Transitioning out of this activity, you want to say something like, the purpose of this was to find out a little bit more about who we are. We can see the values and culture that are present in our team through these stories. And then we can move into a conversation about identifying shared values, which is the next part. And this section we've given about an hour. It could take a little bit more or less. And the purpose of this exercise is to discover what values team members share. And if you're scratching your head and thinking, I don't even know what values are, don't worry, you're not alone. Values can be a really tricky thing to understand. And they're often a little bit squishier than what we typically think of as being important to teams or projects. Values are the things that are important to us and inform how we act and how we make decisions. A value can be a word, a phrase, but it represents something that's important to us about how we show up in the world. We often like to offer a list of common values and words as examples. There is a really great card deck by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, which we will link in our Session Lab template. And you can put those cards out in front of people and have them look at the values words. And here's what we like to do next. We invite participants to think of a time when they felt truly alive or fulfilled in their work. And if you want, you can do this with us as we go along. This can be from any time in their lives, and if they can't think of something, then they should choose to imagine what it would be like for them to feel that way. And then you're going to provide participants with a few basic interview tips because they're going to interview each other about these times. The interview tips are generally to listen actively when your partner is speaking and to ask clarifying questions, such as, can you say more about that? What else? And then what happened? What did that mean to you? And by the way, if you really like these questions, I highly recommend checking out season 3 because we go through a whole bunch of meeting management tips, including asking questions throughout that season. Next, explain to the group that they are about to break up into pairs or trios and interview each other about the time that they were thinking about. The interview should try to capture any values words that they hear. So having that list of examples or the card deck we mentioned is going to help in this section. Each person gets 5 to 10 minutes to share their story and then 5 to 10 minutes to reflect with their partner on what values that they heard. It seems like you value collaboration. Did I get that right? It seems like you value humor. Did I get that right? It's okay if they say you didn't get it right, but you're trying to mirror back, and it creates an opportunity for that person to really think about what values were present. After each person has gone, capture the top 3 values on sticky notes, 1 value per sticky, and you're going to add them to a shared space for the full group. Each person can write their own sticky notes, or their partner can write sticky notes for the other person. It doesn't matter. But each pair would obviously have 6 total together. If you have a trio, they would have 9 and so on. And then the facilitator is going to cluster these values as they receive them. You may want to have a helper come help you cluster the values together. If you run out of time, invite participants to cluster them together. We love using AI as a tool for quickly clustering values words together, so consider using that to make this process faster. Once you've got all those values words clustered, you can say which clusters seem to have the most stickies, and then try to label that cluster. And that process can take a little time. You've probably given about 20 or 30 minutes to do the conversations, and hopefully you end up with a good 20 to 30 minutes in this activity to do this reflection, to label each clusters with a phrase or a word, and then have a conversation about what does this say about how we want to behave with each other. And you're going to capture any of these key behaviors that come up because you're going to use those in the next activity. We've written out all of these instructions in our free Session Lab agenda template, which you can get linked in the description. So you've got, in this case, an hour for lunch. You can always shorten that to 45 minutes if you want. Either way, you need a break. You're going to transfer the key values themes onto the team charter. So you've got this charter template up in the room, and you're putting all the values onto that charter in one place. And remember, our charter's got a lot of different components on it, and this is where it will help to kind of look at our template or Google Team Charter template so that you can see what these tend to look like, because it's almost like we're building towards a picture of something. You've already got the purpose on there, and now you're going to add the values words in one section of the charter template so that you're starting to really create a one-pager of what our team is all about. Are you still with me, meeting makers? We're about to go into the last part of the first day of our team charter, if you're going off of our agenda. And we come back from our break and we do an energizer called Without Me. We learned this from our friend and colleague, Jacob Eastham from Thinkerton Agency. And the purpose of this is to warm up for a conversation to follow about roles and responsibilities. We give this about 20 minutes. The reason we call it Without Me is because you're going to invite participants to say the words, without me, there would be no, or there would be less, and then fill in the blank with the strength that they bring to the team. So for example, they could say, without me, this team might lack effective problem-solving skills. Or maybe someone says, without me, this team might have less creativity. Then you're going to give each person a chance to share their strength and capture these on the team charter template. So the whole idea here is really appreciating the strengths that each team member brings to the team. Once you do this, you can reflect on how can we utilize each other's strengths as a team and have a light conversation that can then transition you easily into a conversation about roles and responsibilities. That's our last section of this first day. We've given this about an hour and a half. And the purpose of this is to, of course, establish clear roles and responsibilities for the team. Now, as always, we have a template that you can purchase and use either on Mural or print a template, or you can feel free to make your own. We'll talk you through what you should include in that. The first step in this activity is to add team members' names along the left column of a matrix that you're going to build. And if you list the names alphabetically, it can help avoid any perception that anyone is more important because they're at the top. Then you're going to invite team members to add key job tasks, activities, or programs along the top of the matrix. So the left side is names, and the top, or what's going to form the columns, are key job tasks, activities, and programs. Silently invite team members to add what they see as their role at the intersection of their name and each activity using these terms: responsible, action owner, consult, and inform. That's the RACI model, RACI, responsible, action owner, consult, and inform. And yes, I know that you might have a slightly different RACI model, and you can use that one if you want to, but I'm giving you the 4-letter version. So again, each member is going to, at the intersection of their name and all of those tasks and activities along the top, to define for each of those tasks if they're responsible for it, if they are an action owner, as in the person who ultimately owns the action. The difference is that the person who's responsible may not be the one who's taking action on it, so it could be a team lead or a senior leader who's delegating. If they're more of a consult, it's a key task or activity that they need to be consulted on and give their feedback on. And inform means that this is a key task or activity where they should simply be informed about the results, but they don't really need to weigh in from a decision-making perspective. So you do this in silence and have all the team members fill in their row. And if there's some blanks, that's okay. For some team members, they may want to indicate their level of knowledge on a topic or a task, and you could do this instead of the RACI or in addition to. We like using Harvey balls for this, which is basically a circle. And if somebody has advanced knowledge of a task or activity, then they get a full circle colored in. If it's a 3/4 full circle, they have maybe average knowledge. If it's a half circle, it's working or some knowledge. Quarter circle is a little bit, and an empty circle would be no knowledge. So it may be helpful to know which team members are responsible, action owner, consult, inform, but also which team members have the most knowledge about certain things, because that is going to help people know who to go to when they have questions about a certain task. And then the other thing that you could do if you want is for any team members who are interested in learning more about certain areas where they may have a gap, you could indicate this by putting a D inside of that intersection or that part of the matrix as in development goal. And if a team member is not interested in learning something, they could indicate this with a minus sign. You don't have to use all of these parts of this, but we're just giving you a lot of options. What you're going to end up with is a great big chart of all the team members, all of the things that the team does, what everyone's responsible for, and who has the most expertise. And this is something that really should get periodically refreshed. And if you need to work with team members to set performance goals, this is also going to be a very valuable resource to work off of. After you do this in silence, you want to do a go around to give each team member a chance to indicate where there maybe is uncertainty about what they put, and that may end up leading to conversations that need to happen offline or with their manager. But even if there are some side conversations or stuck points, always return to the next person on the team after that clarity has been reached, or you determine a next step for how you're going to get clearer after the meeting. Alternatively, the team may review the matrix one column at a time. So instead of going person to person, they could go task or activity to activity. If the group ever gets stuck at any point, then create a next steps list and decide how clarity will be reached again after the meeting. It's also an option that you could fill in some of this in advance of the meeting, but the way that we're offering it is a more collaborative approach if you have the time to do so. And the last thing I'll say about this is that teams with a top-down structure may not have the autonomy for team members to define what their activities are. And if that's the case, you could figure out a visual way to identify which areas of this roles and responsibility matrix are flexible and which are fixed from either a leadership perspective or just simply how the organization is structured or how their role is structured. If this is the end of day one, after this, you would review the day two agenda and maybe do a one word or one phrase checkout just to close the day on a positive note. All right, meeting makers, if you are following along in our agenda, we are headed into day two of our team charter activity. And just remember that you can decide not to do the team charter in full. You may decide that you want to do just parts of it, and that may fit into a day long meeting or a half a day or a meeting series. But just for the purposes of consistency, we're going to pretend like we're now starting day two. We're going to welcome everyone back in, go over the agenda for day two, and we're recommending a check in that's called I'm in. We learned this from facilitator partner Disruptive Element. The purpose of I'm in is to capture any lingering questions or concerns that may be a distraction from the day's tasks. Invite each participant to share a few words about anything relevant to the activity so far that's been on their mind. And once it's been voiced, they say, I'm in, as a way of completing their thought. And then anything that might seem like something the team should revisit from what's been said, capture that as next steps if you don't think it's going to be addressed later in the agenda. There's three parts that we haven't gone through yet, and that's conflict and communication norms, meeting norms, and information sharing. And the last part is team management preferences and decision making. Starting with our conflict and communication norms, the purpose of this is to introduce and build comfort about the idea of conflict and develop communication norms that teams agree with. We've given this about 90 minutes. We find that talking about conflict before conflict happens is one of the best strategies for making conflict feel less like conflict and more like constructive dialogue. So that's why we give this section a good amount of time. The first step is to invite participants to share what does conflict mean to them. And then after a brief discussion, offer that conflict doesn't have to be destructive. It can be constructive if the team has established a baseline of trust, going back to that 5 behaviors of a team model we talked about earlier. So, explain that for conflict to be constructive, a team must first identify how they want to work through it before it happens. So, then you're going to explore norms, in other words, ways to address conflict before it occurs. So, you can invite the team to reflect on one of these questions. What behaviors are out of bounds for us as a team? Or what steps will we take when conflict occurs? And you're going to capture these responses on the team charter template. And if the group is larger than 8, consider doing this in small groups and then capturing the top 3 to 5 takeaways from each group on the team charter template. Invite the team to then share what good communication looks like to them. After a brief discussion, offer that there are a lot of ways to express communication, but a clear understanding of preferences can help prevent misunderstandings. Then you're going to explore what behaviors and norms are essential to maintaining good team communication. The second question you could choose to talk through is what specific guidelines or rules do we want to establish for specific communication tools, such as texting, instant messaging, phone calls, and email? And you're going to capture all of these responses on the team charter template. If the group is larger than 8, you could consider doing this in small groups and capturing the top 3 to 5 takeaways from each group. If you start to get a really long list and you want to narrow it down because you've got 20 things on there and it's just a lot, you could have the team vote on their top 3. You can do that either using dots if you're working on paper or a tool like Mentimeter or an integrated voting tool if you're using something online. If you're following along in our agenda, we're going into a break. And if you haven't done it already, it's a good idea to include a high level version of the roles that you worked on the first day on the team charter template, just so the team charter template includes the names and roles of everybody and makes it feel more personal to that team. Stay with me, meeting makers. We are going to keep rolling. Now we're going into meeting norms and information sharing, which arguably is my favorite part of the team charter process. I think if you plucked out one of these things that you could do very quickly, grab this one. The purpose of this is to align around behaviors for meetings and information sharing. So things like, where are we going to store documents? We've given this activity about an hour, and we include a separate template if you want to use it to do a meeting audit. And that's what we're going to start with. In a meeting audit, you're going to start by inviting team members to take inventory of their current meetings. And if you're a new team, you're going to consider what types of meetings you need on a regular basis. These could be things like weekly meetings, update meetings, scrums, daily stand ups, one on ones, all of that. And you're going to add those in a list on either our template or on a flip chart going down the side. Alongside each meeting, include how frequent these are and how long. Next, invite the team to define the focus of each meeting. So, for example, the focus of our daily tag up is for each team member to briefly share what they will work on that day. And lastly, identify who is and should be attending each meeting, which is why that list of names and roles is going to be helpful at this stage. If you can imagine a template, on the left side, you've got the types of meetings, and going across, you have the frequency, the date, the duration, who should be in each one, and the focus. And again, you can grab our template if you want to have that ready to go for you. Once you've got all that documented, you're going to invite team members to make suggestions for improvement. Could some of these meetings be combined? Do you have too many people in a meeting that are just there to be informed? Are you missing some important people from meetings that are holding them back? Are the dates and times of each meeting still working? And then you're going to work through each meeting on the list with the group and red pen and revise them until the group feels that the meeting rhythms are not too much, not too little, just right. If you start to go over time because you have a lot of things that need to be corrected here, you could pause and finish this activity in a dedicated time and place. For some teams, they've never done this process and it can get really unwieldy. So if that happens, just revise a couple of meetings and come back to the rest later. During a break or after the meeting, we recommend capturing a high level version of your meetings onto the team charter template because you're building this big picture of everything that the team needs to know to help them feel connected and clear. The final part of this section is to explore information sharing. So invite the team to reflect on what types of information is important for everyone to have access to: meeting notes, background documents, SOPs. It's amazing to me when I learned that team members don't have a common place to store meeting notes or a common practice for meeting notes. It's so critical because an hour after the meeting, you have already forgotten half of what was discussed in that meeting. And so if you don't write it down, you don't have a way of really retaining that information. This is probably one of the most important things you could do as a team is decide, where are you going to store your meeting notes? Where are you going to store the things that are most important for the team to refer to? Some teams use SharePoint or Microsoft Teams or Google Drive. If the team has a current program in place, then you're going to want to ask for suggestions for improvement. It may be that your SharePoint site has gotten really unwieldy and you need to set a next step for a group of people to go in and clean it up or revise how you're structuring things. So then, of course, the obvious next question is, who can work on building or updating the information sharing system and bring it back to the group for final feedback. Capture these next steps on your next steps chart. And during a break or after the meeting, capture a high level version of your information sharing norms on your team charter template. We've got one more pretty large section here to get through, and I appreciate you all hanging with me so far. If you are using our agenda, we are going to lunch now. When we come back from lunch, we'll do an energizer. The energizer that we are including in our template is called Draw a Pig. And the purpose of Draw a Pig is to reflect on the importance of establishing clear requirements. It's pretty simple. All you do is invite each participant to draw a pig, and then be really careful to not give any additional guidance. Just see what they come up with. After participants have drawn, invite reflection. You could ask questions like, what did you first think about when I asked you to draw? People will say things like anxiety, uncertainty, had a lot of questions. And how did you approach the challenge? Well, first I laughed and then I just got to drawing and I figured I would come up with something quick and easy. You could ask what emotions came up: fear, humor, uncertainty. And then you want to move into questions that will help people to reflect on communication. What would you have liked me as the facilitator to do differently to make this easier? Have a little bit of a discussion and then end with a question like, what can we learn from this activity when it comes to how we communicate as a team? And the transition from this is to say something like, the purpose of this is to show the importance of clear communication and direction because we're about to go into team management preferences and decision making. If you're following along in our agenda, this section on team management preferences and team decision making is about an hour. And the purpose is to give the team leader feedback on how the team wants to receive guidance and oversight, as well as to give the team a system for how to make decisions collaboratively. And this is something that not a lot of teams do. So, having the ability to have a decision model in place can really help to unburden team leaders and empower the team to make more decisions autonomously. We start off this section by introducing the Blanchard situational leadership model, which goes a little something like this, and there's definitely more to it, but this is how we tee it up. Level one is shadowing, as in, I do, you watch. So I, as the expert or as the leader, do something and you watch how I'm doing it. The manager or leader's role is primarily to teach and demonstrate how a task is performed. Level two of the situational leadership model is partnering. So we do it together. And the manager or leader's role is to coach and guide how to perform a task. Level three is supporting. You do it and I watch. And the manager's role is to provide clear expectations and clear feedback. Level four, or the last level, is delegating, which is a complete handoff. So at this point, the direct report has shown that they can meet and exceed expectations, and the manager's role is simply to give those clear expectations and be available when help is needed, but not to micromanage. And explain that these four levels can help clarify variations in a manager and direct report relationship. Often conflicts occur when there's different expectations. So maybe a direct report needs some partnering, but the manager simply wants to delegate. And so having a conversation about this model can be the foundation for finding some alignment and also to help direct reports move up levels. So maybe the first time we're partnering, but the next time I'm just giving you some guidance or I'm supporting you. You can progress through these levels, but having the language can help have a clearer conversation. As an option, you could invite some candid feedback from the group on how the manager's preferred style of leadership may or may not be working, but this could be better done prior via a survey or potentially should be facilitated by a third party mediator, human resources team member, or facilitator so that the dialogue is properly constructed. Next, invite team members to share what their preferences are around this model and maybe some instances that they may prefer one style over another. And if this gets to be a little bit of an unwieldy conversation, you could have a go around and have each team member share. Capture any guidance that comes up that seems general for the group on the team charter. Each team member is a little bit different, but maybe there's some general guidance, and you could even ask the team, based on this conversation, what would you say is some general guidance for me as your team leader? Or if the team leader isn't facilitating, what's some general guidance for them? For example, we agree as a team that before any new task is assigned, the team leader and whoever the direct reports are decide what level of situational leadership this should be at. If you have more time, you can invite preferences on how team members prefer to receive feedback. For example, some people prefer feedback one-on-one, so not in front of other people. Others want it in the moment, no matter what. And this could also be a step or a discussion that's tackled on an individual, more one-on-one basis. We have covered team management preferences, so now we're going to cover team decision-making norms. Depending on the style of organization, whether it's top-down or more collaborative, you need to start by clarifying Situations in which the team may need to make a collaborative decision. The Tannenbaum and Schmidt leadership continuum is a spectrum of leadership modes when it comes to decision making. To simplify this framework and put it in meeting terms, a tell is when a manager or a leader makes a decision and tells the team what to do. A sell is when a manager or leader makes a decision and invites feedback. A consult is when a manager or leader asks the team to provide guidance for their decision making. And a co create is where the manager and leader supports whatever the team decides. Organization structure and manager preference certainly dictate what kind of decision making options are possible in an organization. And when a situation is urgent or highly chaotic, there may not be time for anything other than a tell. Think about a natural disaster or other type of crisis. Someone just needs to give direction because the situation calls for it. But for situations where a consultative or co creative decision is possible, the team may want to align on a common process or model that they decide on for how they will make decisions. In other words, they're going to decide how they will decide. For example, a team of developers is provided with a new ticket from a customer and may need to decide who is going to take on that task. They may need to agree that the best person to take on the task is the person with the most expertise. But if that person is not available, they could mentor someone with less experience and more availability. And so simply defining that criteria could be enough for a team to use as decision making guidance. And potentially, a team may need to organize a system for how to assess that criteria. So, again, the first step is simply coming up with a list of situations that call for collaborative decisions to be made, and you have this as a reference. The next step is to brainstorm decision criteria that factor into most decisions that the team needs to make. And this can be a struggle for some. So, to help, we're going to give you a few ideas. A decision criteria could be alignment to our goals and objectives. Another criteria could be feasible. Can we do it? Another criteria could be our stakeholders. Who's impacted? Another one could be risk, cost benefit, ethics, as in, is it right? Consensus, as in, is there agreement from most people? Flexibility, can it adapt? Sustainability, is it long term? Or track record, is there any precedent for this decision? So we've got all of that documented in our session lab template. And it's up to the team to vote on the top 2 to 5 decision criteria and organize them from most to least important. So, for example, first we're going to evaluate a challenge or a new activity based on alignment to our objectives. Then we're going to think about, is there a cost benefit to it? And then we're going to think about, do we have consensus on our approach? That's simply a list of steps. And for some groups, having that list of steps is enough, and they can stop here and just capture that list or those criteria on the team charter. But for other groups, they may need a robust model. They may need to actually build out that criteria into a visual that can help the team use it on a more ongoing basis. So if you want to continue and build out a visual, we've got a process for how to do that in the agenda. It's under Here's How to Continue, and it's in the section that's called Team Management Preferences and Team Decision Making. But if this is enough, then you do not have to continue. It may be enough just to have the decision criteria listed. The final step is to establish team charter norms and rhythms. And the purpose of this last step, it's about 15 minutes, is to ensure that any new team members have a chance to learn about and contribute to the team charter. Explain to the group that the team charter needs to be visible and routinely updated in order for it to actually impact group behavior. Think of this like putting a sticky note on your bathroom mirror that reminds you to brush your teeth. It's something that we have to have present as a trigger in order for us to actually follow through on it. And this is especially true when new team members join, others leave, as new people and people leaving can impact the group preferences. So we recommend refreshing this about every 6 months, but at least once a year. And then invite team members to identify where they want to keep the team charter. Probably your bathroom mirror isn't the best place. Maybe team members want to put a picture of it as their internal team webpage banner, or maybe as the background of their computer. Maybe they want to print it out. Or if you want to get really creative, put it on a mug or a mouse pad or some other common desktop item. And then invite the team to identify when they would prefer to review and update the team charter. Project and organizational requirements may necessitate that the team manager make a final decision about when is best for this. Lastly, I'll say, if your team charter looks like a big mess of sticky notes or is just not a very clean or polished version, you may want to set up a next step to create a slide version of it, or even hand it off to a graphic designer to make a more polished version of it so that the team can have something that they get really excited about. And I'll also do a shameless plug for our sister company, Dancing with Markers, because having a visual note taker come in and build the team charter can be a great way to walk out with a really cohesive and beautiful visual of the team charter. And you can learn more about Dancing with Markers at dancingwithmarkers.com, and you can reach out to us on the contact page. Finally, always remember to do a next steps list. We commonly use a list of who is doing what by when. You can get the process for that in our agenda. It's also the same one we went over earlier in our session. One of our favorite ways to close out a session like this is to close with words of appreciation. Each team member shares something that they appreciated about the experience or something that they would like to thank the team for. And that, my friends, is the end of our team charter experience. Again, in this episode, you learned project kickoff and team charter. You do not have to do everything as we have listed it, but we have given you everything if you want it. Remember, it's okay if your team feels like they're starting anew, whether that was your intention or not. Kickoffs and team charters are a chance for growth and alignment. And if you're facing uncertainty, struggling with communication, or simply feeling overwhelmed, there's always a path forward. And by creating a solid team charter together, you can lay the groundwork for success, ensuring that everyone is on the same page and ready to tackle whatever comes their way. In the next episode, we're going to discuss the next stage in our framework, which is building trust. So roll up your sleeves, schedule some time, and go make your meetings work. This podcast was written by Lauren Green and produced by Caitlin Murray. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a few seconds to rate and review so future meeting makers can find our community. You can find our next Meeting Makers Academy workshop on our website at www.makemeetings.work/academy. Want help with your next meeting? Reach out at makemeetings.work/contact and we'll set up time to chat.